Many scientists, clinicians, and medical communicators use or even rely on AI tools to refine their writing. Although AI tools can be helpful, they have limitations and risks that require you as the human to take the lead. Last week, I walked through how one AI editing tool can give you some inspiration for revising text. But there were a lot of things that could be improved that the tool didn't catch or isn't capable of catching. So in this video, I'm going head to head with that tool to show you how I would revise the text so you can see how humans are crucial and so valuable in the revising process. And if we haven't met, hello, my name is Crystal Heron. I'm a trained biomedical scientist turned clinical researcher and now scientific and medical editor. And since 2011, I've helped scientists, clinicians, and medical communicators write with intention, clarity, and confidence. So if you have not already seen the video from last week, I recommend watching that before this one, and I'll add a link to it in the description box. And before we dive into the sample, I have a couple of things to note. So as I mentioned last week, the sample is a short paragraph that I drafted based on something that I read and that reflects some of the writing problems that I saw in that original excerpt. And although I could have used the actual excerpt, which was published as an open access article with a CC BY license, I don't want to publicly critique someone's writing without their explicit permission. So I'm using an example that I created that has some of those same problems. Now, another thing that I want to note is that editing is circular and often requires multiple passes through the text. And this could mean that making a change later in a document means you need to go back to change something earlier in the document or to even undo a change that you made before. And that is part of the process and is likely something that you'll see in this video. And the third note is that I want to emphasize that there isn't one right way to write or edit something. In this video, I will share one way to revise the sample, but that is not the only possible way. Often when I edit, I will experiment with the text by writing multiple versions and then choosing the one that I like best. And sometimes I need to work more closely with the authors to ensure that the details are accurate and precise and have the meaning that the author intends. Okay, let's get to the sample. So here is the sample that we looked at with EditGPT last week. And so I'm going to read it again, so bear with me. Numerous studies have demonstrated a significant correlation between decreased serum albumin levels and an increased incidence of atrial fibrillation. While this has been consistently observed in many studies, the potential benefits of modifying serum albumin levels in patients at risk for atrial fibrillation remain unclear. Consequently, it is imperative to assess the causal relationship between serum albumin levels and atrial fibrillation to facilitate the development of new therapeutic strategies for atrial fibrillation. Okay, so I'm going to walk through how I would revise this sample text. And some of the things that I will change are similar or even the same as the changes that were suggested by EditGPT. And some of them will be different and very different in some cases. So the first thing that I want to point out with this sample is the structure of it. So this is a paragraph, and this paragraph dives right into the details. And I think that it would actually be stronger if it had a topic sentence, and that would help to guide the reader into the details. Now, adding a topic sentence means that you're going to add words to it. And so if you're concerned about a word limit, you might be concerned about adding a topic sentence. And so we're going to go ahead and add a topic sentence and see what happens with the word count. And so right now we are at 72 words with this sample. So let's see what happens as we revise it. So I'm going to keep in mind that I want to add a topic sentence. And to do that, I'm actually going to use some of the information that's in this first sentence. So if we look at the topic of this sentence, it is talking about atrial fibrillation and the connection or relationship that it has with serum albumin. I almost said levels. I'm going to suggest a change there. I'm going to say concentration. We'll get to that in a minute. And so I want to add a topic sentence that just lets the reader know, hey, we're going to talk about this relationship a little bit. So I would add atrial fibrillation. Oh, thank you for bearing with me while I type here. Has been linked to serum albumin concentrations. Okay, so I'll tell you about concentrations now. So level is one of the most misused words in scientific and medical writing, I think. And the reason is because it has many definitions and can be vague for readers. And so a more precise, a more accurate term is concentration or amount. Amount is also great because it's fewer syllables, but concentration is a little bit more precise in some cases. So we're going to stick with concentration here. And if you want to know more about level, I have an article on it and a YouTube video on it, and I'll add links to both of those in the description box in case you want to learn more about the nuances of why I discourage using that word in this context. So here we're adding a topic sentence to help guide the reader into this paragraph. And it's a short topic sentence, which I think is always great whenever you can. But the other thing that I want to point out is that this paragraph, this sentence of this paragraph is starting with the subject of atrial fibrillation. Now, depending on the audience or the readership, depending on the journal, atrial fibrillation may not be the best topic to start with. So if we say that this is the very first paragraph of the introduction section of a research manuscript, if you are submitting this manuscript to a cardiac-specific journal, Circulation, for example, starting with atrial fibrillation could make sense because the readership is likely going to know what atrial fibrillation is. However, if you are submitting this manuscript to something more broad, like Nature or Science, you might want to start with a broader subject, such as cardiovascular disease, just to help guide readers into it who may not be as familiar with atrial fibrillation. And honestly, even if you're publishing in a journal that's more specialized, like say Circulation, I might still consider starting with something like cardiovascular disease, and that way it just makes your article more accessible to a broader audience. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so here we have a topic sentence. Now let's look at the rest of the text. And let me see. What I'm going to do is I'm going to point out a few things that I'm noticing as I work through the sentences, and then I'll revise them. So one thing I notice in this second sentence here, we have numerous studies. So a couple of things I notice. One is numerous. It's a lot of syllables. Numerous most times can be replaced with many, which is just 2 syllables. So I would say many studies. And if you are faced with a character limit instead of a word count, or you have a page limit instead of a word count limit, using shorter words instead of longer words can buy you some characters or some space to shorten the text. So there's a lot of wins with changing numerous to many, for example. So that would be one change that I would make. The other thing too is starting the sentence with the subject of numerous studies and then getting into what those studies found. Readers care more about what was found than that many studies found them. And so I would actually encourage you not to start your sentences with things like numerous studies or research has shown or studies have found, and just get right to the data. And in this particular case with numerous studies, we can still signal that there are numerous studies by adding citations at the end of this sentence. And for this example, there are no citations because I revised it based on something that I had found. But what I would do is just make sure to add multiple citations at the end of this sentence, not just one or two, but several, to show the reader that there are many studies that have demonstrated this. Okay, so what else do I notice in this sentence? Numerous studies have demonstrated a lot of syllables. We can just change that to something shorter, like shown. So that's something that we're going to look at. Significant correlation. So there's pros and cons to this. One is the word significant is suggesting that it's statistically significant, clinically significant, biologically significant. I'm not entirely sure in this case, but the significant is showing that importance. However, it's saying a significant correlation. What exactly is that correlation? So it just makes me wonder, is it a positive correlation? Is it a negative correlation? What's the relationship? And so the good thing about this is that it is explained later in the sentence. So I will give it that, but that's just something else to keep in mind, that I will see a lot of authors say things like, oh, there was a significant difference, but it doesn't really tell the reader a whole lot. And so describing that nuance can actually be really beneficial, not just for the reader's understanding, but it can really highlight the compelling, the significant part of the work. Okay, so what else do I notice between decreased? So I mentioned this last week. Decreased and increased are two of the most misused words in scientific and medical writing, and that better words to use in this case would be lower and higher. And I have a publication and a video on that I will add to the description box in case you want to know a little bit more about that. So I would change that, and then here we have the levels, which I would change, and an increased incidence of H. Okay, I think the rest of it is okay. So this is a first pass, right? So I might make different changes if I were to go through this multiple times, but on a first pass, what I would do is I would add a transition word here. And it's the word I'm going to use is indeed. And the reason that I'm adding this is it's signaling to the reader that I just told you that there's this link. Now I'm going to give you more details. And I will say that indeed is often a transition word that you can just delete without really thinking too much about it. I'm going to add it in with the idea of right now it's going to make it a little bit clearer for readers. And as I go through other passes, I can think about whether I want to really keep this, or if it comes down to, oh my gosh, I need to delete a word before I submit this thing and I only have 10 minutes, this would be the first word to go. So, but for now, we're going to put it in. All right, and we don't need the numerous studies have demonstrated all of that. So we're going to take that part out. And then I am going to say, a significant correlation. I'm going to change this to, actually what I'm going to do, so in this topic sentence, we have atrial fibrillation linked to serum albumin. So we have the order of atrial fibrillation and then serum albumin. In this sentence, we have the order of serum albumin and then atrial fibrillation. So I'm actually going to flip it. And that way both sentences go in the same order. And that is going to create some parallelism in the topics. And it's also going to go broad and then narrow. So atrial fibrillation is kind of bigger picture. Serum albumin is like a smaller piece. And so that is what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to say indeed, I'm not going to say an increased incidence of atrial fibrillation. I'm going to move this up here and say that a higher incidence of atrial fibrillation, and then I'm going to say was negatively correlated. So I mentioned before, correlation, is it positive, is it negative? What is this actual relationship? I'm going to add in the word negatively. So negatively correlated, and we don't want decrease, we're going to say lower serum albumin concentrations. And then get rid of the rest of this sentence here. So now we have, indeed, a higher incidence of atrial fibrillation was negatively correlated with lower serum albumin concentrations. I like that better. Now, I will add that if you say that something is negatively correlated, you don't necessarily need to say, well, if this one was lower, then this one was higher. However, in this case, I think it's a little bit stronger with it, and it guides the reader through it in a way that they don't have to go, okay, it's negatively correlated, so one goes up, one goes down. It walks them through it. If you're faced with a word limit and something's really critical, you could probably remove those details, although I would hesitate to, but that is something that I'm making the intentional choice to put those in to make sure that the details are very clear for readers. Pardon the interruption, but I wanted to say that if you are inspired to revise this sample, I'd love to see your revision in the comments below. We can all learn different ways to write by seeing how other people might revise the text. In fact, in my Scientific Writing Simplified course in the Redwood Ink Academy, we have weekly exercises like this where I post an excerpt that members can revise and share, and it's so much fun to see the different ways that people revise the excerpt. It's the most popular space in the Academy. I'll add a link to the description box in case you want to check out the course. Okay, let's get back to the sample. Okay, so let's move on to the next sentence. So here we have, while this has been consistently observed in many studies, the potential benefits of modifying serum albumin levels in patients at risk for atrial fibrillation remain unclear. Okay, so a couple things I also pointed out last week. We have while. So in this case, while is not the most precise word to use. A better word to use would be although. And so that's one thing I'm keeping in mind. And then we have the isolated pronoun this without a clear subject. So while this what? What is it referring to in this sentence? Is it the incidence of atrial fibrillation? Is it lower serum albumin concentrations? Is it the negative correlation? We don't know for sure. And so this means that the reader has to guess or read the previous sentence to figure it out, or carry the cognitive load of that sentence into this sentence to try to figure it out. And so we would want to add a clear subject to it. So I think EditGPT added relationship and association. I would say correlation because we have correlated here. And so we have that similar term to help create a stronger connection. So I'm going to make those changes. We're going to end up doing something different, but I'm going to make those two changes just so that you can see them. So we changed while to although and this correlation, and then we're going to keep going. So although this correlation has been consistently observed in many studies, so there are some things here that we could take out that we talked about last week, but I'm going to keep going and then we'll come back to this. Then we have the potential benefits of modifying serum albumin levels, right? We don't want levels, so we're just going to go ahead and change that right now by modifying serum albumin concentrations in patients at risk for atrial fibrillation remain unclear. So the other thing to notice here is this text here, this phrase is serving as a transition to guide readers from the preceding sentence into this sentence. So we're going to deal with that in a moment. And the thing that I want to point out is that the actual subject of this sentence is all of this. The potential benefits of modifying serum albumin concentrations in patients at risk for atrial fibrillation. So ideally you want short, concrete subjects in your sentences, and it will make it a lot clearer for readers. And so that means that you want 1, 2, in a rare case, maybe 3 words before the main verb of the sentence so that the subject is clear and concrete. See, here you have this huge long phrase before you get to the main verb of remain. So that is something that I also want to change. So let's tackle this. So starting with this transition, and we actually saw this suggestion from EditGPT, which was to take this and just to make it however, because the details are redundant with what was already discussed in the preceding sentence. So now we have a nice short transition word of however, which is signaling to the reader that although this is the case, we're kind of shifting gears a little bit. So it's a nice guide for readers. So let's deal with this long subject. So the thing that comes to mind for me is that when you say something remains unclear to whom? And so this sentence is missing an actor. And so I want to add in an actor. And I want to say, in this case, it could vary depending on your particular study. In this case, I'm going to say researchers. And it could be clinicians, it could be policymakers. It depends on what particular group you are referring to. I'm going to go with researchers here without having looked at what the studies are, and just know that that may not be the best subject depending on what it is you're discussing in the text. So I'm going to go with researchers, and rather than saying remains unclear, I'm going to say that researchers do not know, and I'm going to say whether. Yeah, do not know whether. So however, researchers do not know whether. So we have an actor in here. We have researchers, something that the reader can relate to, and they know who this is unclear to. So researchers do not know whether the potential benefits of modifying. I talked last week about how potential adds some hedging in here. I'm actually going to do something a little different. Benefits is a nice word, saying that something would benefit patients. We see that often, but I'm actually going to change this and take out the potential benefits of modifying serum albumin. And I'm going to change this to correcting. However, researchers do not know whether correcting serum albumin concentrations. I like that. We could be a little more precise and say correcting low serum albumin concentrations. I don't think it's necessarily needed though, so I'm going to leave it out in this case. But that's something I'm going to keep in the back of my mind and might be something I would consider in a second pass. Okay, so however, researchers do not know whether correcting serum albumin concentrations in patients at risk. Actually, I'm going to add back in that will benefit. Patients at risk for atrial fibrillation. We no longer need remain unclear because we have that at the beginning. So now we have, however, researchers do not know whether correcting serum albumin concentrations will benefit patients at risk for atrial fibrillation. I like that much better. And we still have that benefit word in here. We have correcting, like you're going to fix something. So it's really, it's a strong verb. I like that. Okay, so those are the first two sentences. Let's tackle the last one. And this one, we saw, even with EditGPT, that there was a lot happening here that they changed. So this one is going to take a little bit of work. So I'm going to walk through things that I notice, and then we will revise it. So we have consequently, which I talked about last time, that I would change this word. EditGPT suggested using therefore. I would use thus instead. Actually, let's just go ahead and make that change. Then we have this, it is imperative. So a couple things I noticed with that. One is this phrasing of it is something, where it is a subject. In this case, it's an expletive pronoun. And so we don't know what it is referring to. So the reference is not clear. And by saying it is imperative, it's not referring to something in the preceding sentence. It's just referring to something. It's imperative to who? And so that is something that we want to keep in mind. We want to add a clear subject here to indicate who it's imperative to. So, okay, what else do we have? We have assess. So we talked about last week how it's a weak verb and we want to use something that's stronger. Then we have the causal relationship. This feels a little bit jargony to me. So we'll think about that as we work on this. Okay, then we have between serum albumin levels and atrial fibrillation. Oh, I'm going to change this to concentration. I know I'm making some changes along the way. As I said, we were going to review all the things, but sometimes it's just you pull out some of the weeds to really assess what needs to be done in the garden. That's kind of what I'm doing. Okay, so between serum albumin concentration and atrial fibrillation to facilitate, remember the EditGPT made some changes to this word, so we're probably going to change it. We have the development of, so this is a nominalization. Development is a nominalization, and it is derived from the verb develop. And so we might want to pull out that verb. And if you're curious to know more about nominalizations, I'll add a link to an article that I wrote in the description box. Okay, and then we have new therapeutic strategies. So therapeutic, a lot of syllables. Strategies, a lot of syllables. There is some persuasiveness there, so we're going to think about that. And then we have for atrial fibrillation. So we're indicating what the strategies are for. Okay, so a couple of things I notice. So one thing that stands out to me, because we just talked about this, is the order of information. So up here we have atrial fibrillation to serum albumin. And then we have atrial fibrillation to serum albumin. And so here, let's see, then this sentence we have correcting serum albumin will benefit patients. So we could really go either way. So I was deciding whether I wanted to mention serum albumin concentration before atrial fibrillation or to reverse it. I think in either case, it could work either way, because if we switch it, it's parallel with these ones. If we don't switch it, it's parallel with the preceding one. Because it was the preceding one, I'm going to leave the order as it is. So let's stick with that. Okay, let's deal with this expletive pronoun. So rather than saying it is imperative, who is it imperative to? That's what we want to indicate. So I'm going to look back and figure out, well, how can I connect to the preceding sentence? I want to find something in here to help connect these sentences. And so this sentence is referring to researchers and saying that it's imperative to understand this relationship. It's also imperative for researchers to understand it. So I'm going to use the same subject. And rather than saying, let's see, so researchers need, that's really all you need to do. So we can say researchers need to assess. So you could also say, instead of need to, you could say must. It's a little bit stronger. It's one word. The meaning is a little bit different. So that's something to keep in mind. So we're going to stick with need to, but another option would be to change it to must. Okay, so thus researchers need to assess. Let's deal with this weak verb here. I want to change this. So EditGPT changed it to evaluate and determine. I think both of those work. Another one, not everyone will agree with me on this. Dissect comes to mind for me. There are different verbs you could use. I actually have an article that I wrote on strong verbs, and there's a cheat sheet that you can download with it. So I'll make sure there's a link to that in the description box as well. But the dissect, sometimes people think they're like dissecting something in a lab. So maybe dissect isn't the best option to use here. But I like how compelling it is. It's a really strong verb. There's direction to it. It's a little bit stronger than, say, evaluate. Or here we go. Instead of dissect, we could do identify. Researchers need to identify the causal relationship. So there's more syllables there, more syllables in identify than in dissect, but it's really concrete of exactly what needs to be done. So I think we're going to go with identify. Okay, causal relationship. So this one's feeling a little funny to me. If this were me and I were writing it for myself, I would change these. This would be something with an author that I might query them and say, what do you think about changing this to something else? I might say identify the direct link. Something about causal. Because when I think of causal, I really think of something very specifically causing something else versus contributing. And it could be a contributing thing here versus causing. And so it just feels not quite right to me. So I think I would go with direct link, but I think I will leave it for now, knowing that I would probably talk to the authors about this one. Okay, so thus researchers need to identify the causal relationship between serum albumin concentration and atrial fibrillation to facilitate. So we talked last time about the word support. I like support, so we're going to go with that. Inform also was pretty good, but I like support a little bit better. Support just feels stronger. So atrial fibrillation to support the development of new therapeutic strategies. Okay, I'm having a couple of thoughts here. One is this is a nominalization, and it would be better to pull out the verb develop. There could be a meaning change here though, which is why I'm a little unsure. So we could say to develop new therapeutic strategies, or to support the development of, or to support, actually developing would be at least one step better, to support developing. The meaning's a little different actually. We could, this is where you see that there's this process of judgment and discernment and circular editing as you figure out the best thing to do. So we have to support the development of, or to support developing, or to develop. So to develop feels almost like an overstatement to me. And I think that's why I'm struggling a little bit with wanting to just say to develop. And I like the to support a little bit better. Developing versus the development of. Let me read the sentence. So, thus researchers need to identify the causal relationship between serum albumin concentration and atrial fibrillation to support developing new therapeutic strategies, to support the development of. You know, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I actually think that I like the development of better. And it's rare that I will say, let's go with the nominalization, but I think in this case, it works. Now I'm wondering, could we take it out? So to support new therapeutic, support the two, you know what? I'm actually going to go with what we saw last week with ChatGPT, and I'm going to take out this whole bit and just say to inform. And I think we capture everything. We lose that persuasive support, but we also get rid of the nominalization that drains persuasion, right? So we boost it up with support and then we drain it with development. So if we take them out and add inform, I think it's a good balance, and it captures the essence, the meaning with this word. So we have to inform new therapeutic strategies for atrial fibrillation. I like this. So the other thing that I would do too is we have new therapeutic strategies. Therapeutic, it's a lot of syllables. Strategies, a lot of syllables. We can condense these two words and just say therapies. To inform new therapies. And then we just bought ourselves a word and some syllables as well. So, okay, is there anything else that I would do here? So one other thing that we could consider, atrial fibrillation, is here we have atrial fibrillation, and then we have atrial fibrillation again here. And so I might change one of these to this condition just to remove the repetitiveness within the sentence. I'm not often a fan of using different terms. I'm all about mixing up the verbs, but using similar terms is really helpful for readers' understanding. And I have an article on this that I'll also link to in the description box. But in this case, because it's within the same sentence, so that I'm not repeating the same phrasing so close to each other as well, I'm going to go with this condition. Okay, so this is a first pass. But what we have now, I will read the whole thing. So Atrial fibrillation has been linked to serum albumin concentrations. Indeed, a higher incidence of atrial fibrillation was negatively correlated with lower serum albumin concentrations. However, researchers do not know whether correcting serum albumin concentrations will benefit patients at risk for atrial fibrillation. Thus, researchers need to identify the causal relationship between serum albumin concentration and atrial fibrillation to inform new therapies for this condition. Not bad for a first pass. I might make a few other changes, one being that causal relationship thing, and maybe a couple other things. But as a first pass, that's not too bad. And we are now at, let's see how many words we are at here. We are at 64 words. And so before it was 72, now we're at 64, and we added a sentence. So that's something to keep in mind too, is that you can still add the topic sentence. And by making changes elsewhere, you can not only make up for that space or the text that you're adding, but you can delete even more of it. So I think that's actually a great example of this. And like I mentioned, we could reduce this even more. The Indeed piece is not necessary, but it's a nice signpost for readers. We said negatively correlated with lower serum albumin a higher incidence was negatively correlated with lower concentrations. So we could always remove negatively because we have the higher and lower, or we can delete the higher and lower piece and just say it's a negative correlation. It's just that would be a little bit more cognitive work for readers that I don't love as much. I might also look at a different word besides correcting. Because sometimes it might be like a preventing versus a correcting. So that might be something I would really think about. And let me see. I think off the top of my head, those are the things that I would visit first. But I think it's not too bad where it is right now. So by working through this sample text, you can see how much I relied on my judgment, my discernment, and my empathy for readers to craft something that will be clear for readers. So based on the video from last week and this video, you can see how AI tools can be helpful for some inspiration, but you, the human, are the key to great writing. I've also covered a lot of tips in real time in this video, and there are links to articles in the description box if you want to learn more about some of the topics that I covered. But some of the topics require a much deeper dive than a short article can cover. If you want to take that dive, I highly recommend checking out my Scientific Writing Simplified course. Not only do you get access to a course, but you also get an incredible supportive community of researchers and medical communicators. We'd be thrilled to have you. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you in the next video.